Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunland Echo. My name is Jason Jones, joined by Phil Smith and James Copley on this rather brisk Monday morning, I think it's fair to say. Sunland back in action at the weekend, obviously an international break, but they went down to the Den on Saturday afternoon. 1-1 draw, late 1-1 draw as well, has to be said. Millwall scoring in added time at the end of that game. Difficult one to assess, I think, Phil. I mean, is that a good point given the personnel issues that Sunderland had, or is it a disappointing one given how late they conceded?
I think it's. I think in the context of where they were in terms of the team and also the season generally, I think it's a good point. I think at the start of any season, I think a point away at Millwall's a good point. Like their form this season's been brilliant, especially at home. I think when you add to it the list of absentees, which obviously got bigger ahead of the game with Dennis Erkin missing, when you saw the inexperience on the bench as well, I think if at 2 o'clock he'd offered pretty much any Sunderland fan a 1-1 draw, I think they'd have snapped your hand off for it, to be honest. And I think that was, so in that sense, the result was a positive. And I think also the positive was for such a reshuffled team and for such an inexperienced team to play so well for the first 40 minutes or whatever it was before obviously the long stoppage. I think it was a huge positive. And I think when you step back, you can take a lot away from the game, from the fact that I thought Meander looked a real threat on the right. I thought Tommy Watson looked much better on the left. Connolly and Isidore showed they can play together. Connolly put a real shift in, when he was on the pitch, dropping into midfield. So there were loads of positives. It's just obviously the worst possible way to draw a game 1-1, which is to concede in the 93rd minute, seconds after you have a big chance to finish it off and make it 2-0. So I think in the context of having chucked away 2 points against Coventry, which, let's be honest, Sunderland did, I think it's really, really frustrating. And it obviously lifts the pressure even more, really, for this next couple of games. So I think in the context of where Sunderland were in the season, I think it's a point gained. But very obviously, it's 2 points dropped in sort of the context of what they did against Coventry, and having been leading. But I think that, this is a better point than the Coventry one, if that makes sense, is what I would say. I think you have to take some positives from this, whereas the Coventry one, I mean, it feels like an even bigger missed opportunity now, doesn't it? Because if you'd won that game, this feels like a really, really good point, and not so much now. So, yeah, as you said, I think a really weird one to assess.
Phil sort of alluded to it there, James, but Sunderland started at a canter. I think it's fair to say, much the better team, and a first goal for the club for Aaron Connolly as well.
Yeah, that was a great finish. Absolutely delighted for him. Obviously, he's come in being very open about his struggles, which has endeared him to Sunderland fans. So excellent finish and a real marker of his quality. I agree with Phil. I thought he did well, sort of playing up top with Isidore, but then dropping in. I think, though, Sunderland looked really good in that first half, and I don't think that break helped them. Obviously, there was 2 medical emergencies in the Millwall end. We obviously wish them well. So the game was paused for about half an hour, and then they came back on to finish the first half. Then they were away for the second half, and Sunderland didn't seem to react well to that, although what you have to say is that it's the same for both sides. So you can't really use it as an excuse because Millwall experienced the same disruption and they came out for the second half better. I do agree with Phil. I think a point at the Den is always a good point. Sunderland, I don't think, have not won there since, I think it's 1995 under Peter Reid. So it's a long time. I think given the selection challenges coming into the game, I said on social media, I would have snapped your hand off for a point. Sunderland got a point. However, when you are leading with 2 minutes to go and Milan Alexic misses that chance, it is really hard to bear. I do wonder, though, whether there's a slight trend emerging where Sunderland seem to drop off in the second half of games, and Lebruce's formation, the way Lebruce plays, he's happy for other teams to have the ball, and I think that's okay when Sunderland go a goal up. But when a team is then chasing the game, to allow them to have a lot of the ball can present risks. Obviously, Sunderland have done it magnificently earlier on in the season, against Burnley and the like. So it has worked for them. But sometimes I think when you allow the opposition too much of the ball, you are inviting trouble, and I think you will concede late goals. So that's something perhaps that I would like to see sort of rectified, maybe a little bit more control in the second half of games if Sunderland are leading, a little bit more possession. Big caveat to that is, though, there was no Joe Bellingham in that midfield. Patrick Roberts, obviously, Meander did well, but he wasn't there. Trey Hume. So it comes against the backdrop that was a severely depleted Sunderland squad. However, coming from the Coventry game as well, where Sunderland surrendered the lead, you don't really want these trends to start emerging. 4 drawn games on the spin, unbeaten in 9, I think it is now, 8 or 9. So it comes back to what we said on the podcast a couple of shows ago. It's whether you're a glass half full or glass half empty person. But I do think there's a genuine middle ground. I'm not overly concerned yet. Obviously, Sunderland's second with Leeds' massive result away to Swansea 4-3 in the dying embers. So yeah, I think there's a lot to go at and a lot to come from the game, and the games are coming thick and fast as well, and it makes Tuesday night and Friday night really, really interesting.
And obviously a much altered team through necessity, really, wasn't it, at the weekend? Just sort of wanted to pick your brains on a few of those alterations, Phil, and what you sort of made of them. Obviously, we saw Luke O'Nien shift out to right back and Dan Ballard come into the centre of defence alongside Chris Mepham. I mean, what did you make of that partnership at the heart of defence? And do you potentially see a sort of solution moving forward whereby maybe Ballard usurps O'Nien a little bit? A lot of people seemingly quite impressed with his performance at the weekend.
I think it was a good game for him. I think that's I thought Ballard and Mepham were amazing in terms of dealing with balls in the box and actually mostly dealing with long balls. One of Lebris's, when I spoke to him after the game, his big frustration was that I actually felt Sunderland had dealt pretty well with the long balls, the crosses into the box. What he was frustrated with is that Sunderland didn't react for the second balls. So quite often, Ballard and Mepham were winning those headers, they were winning those challenges, but Sunderland weren't really taking advantage of that, and Millwall were just basically able to recycle possession. So I definitely think that, I think there is definitely a chance that at times Ballard and Mepham play together. I think the thing about O'Nien is, in my opinion, I think he offers more than both those players in possession. So I think if it's a game where Sunderland are playing, against a side who's maybe quite happy to sit off, who's sitting quite deep, I think what O'Nien can offer you in terms of his ability to switch the play, and we see him play those long passes out of the winger and create openings that way. And he's also really comfortable, obviously, kind of striding out with the ball. I think the way he's developed that aspect of his game and what he can offer makes him a really important player. But I also think that in terms of defensive ability and defensive situations, understandably, because of their especially with Ballard's physicality, but also the fact that they're two kind of natural centre halves, if you like. I think they're obviously in that kind of situation where you're under a lot of pressure and you have to defend your box. I think Ballard and Mepham are kind of an obvious partnership. I thought they were excellent. Again, Mepham's sort of anticipation, his positioning, and his calm, I think, in an atmosphere like that just stood out again. So I think that it's definitely a partnership I can see happening, but I also think it's one where we shouldn't expect to see it too much, because I just think what O'Nien offers on the ball in certain games makes him a bit of a lock for the team. But yeah, it was interesting, because I did think Sunderland dealt well, really, with how they defended their box. It was kind of in front of it where they seemed to, and out wide where they seemed to lose it. But I disagree slightly with James. I don't think Sunderland dropped off on Saturday. And my sense was, if you look back to, say, a Burnley game and Middlesbrough game at home, I felt Sunderland had dropped off because they were happy to let the opposition have the ball sort of, just inside their half. On Saturday, I actually don't think it was deliberate. I think they just got penned in. I think Millwall, I think anyone who has been to them will tell you the atmosphere it's not like anywhere else really in the division. Millwall were just chucking, sort of big strikers on one after the other, and I think they just penned Sunderland back. And I think the mistake, what Sunderland weren't able to do, is they weren't able to fully take advantage of the counter-attacking opportunities. I think sometimes you have to give credit to the opposition and you have to accept where you are as a team. I think Millwall were always going to make it difficult in that second half and get up the pitch because of how direct they are, because of the strength they've got. What you should be able to do is make more of the space they're leaving behind, and that was my frustration with Sunderland. Having said that, I do think tired legs were a massive part of that. I think you saw someone like Rigg, for example, who was brilliant in the first half an hour of the game. Towards the end, he wasn't able to make some passes that normally, we see him do really easily. So, yeah, I thought there was loads. As I say, I thought there were loads of positives, and I put Ballard and Mepham up there. I think the second half, I think Millwall were just able to turn the screw, and the fact that Lebris at the moment doesn't really have the options to make subs is kind of a massive problem, really.
And the flip side of that, James, is obviously Luke O'Nien shifting out to right back. We've spoken a lot about Sunderland's lack of cover for Trey Hume at the present moment in time. I mean, did his performance suggest to you that actually maybe it's not so much of a concern for Regis Lebris?
I think O'Nien did well enough at right back. He's obviously played there quite a lot before. However, for the goal, perhaps left a little bit in no man's land, pushing forward. But yeah, I think he is to be brutally honest, I think he is a good option at right back if Trey Hume is out. I think Trey Hume is quite obviously the best option at right back, but it's pleasing now across that back line that Sunderland seemingly have a few options. I thought Aji Alisi was absolutely superb. I think to come back in from the cold from a 2 or 3 month injury, I think it was. I think he was out back end of August from memory, so quite a while. And he was brilliant playing at left back, which is not his natural position, but he does play there. There was the blow with Dennis Cirkin. That's supposed to only be a short term injury. So if he gets back quick, we've got Alisi. 09 Ballard Mepham that can play centre back, and then 09 who can play right back alongside Hume. Then you've got the option of Leo Hjelde who missed out making the squad against Millwall with a minor injury. So all of a sudden that back line does look like it has some strength there. I think full back is still a position on either side really that we'd like to see Sunderland strengthen just because of the injury records. Obviously now Huggins isn't going to be around for a long time. And of course, Chris Mepham picked up his fourth yellow card against Millwall, so he's one game away from a ban. So I sense over the Christmas period and towards the back end of the season, there's going to have to be, rest, rotation, suspension, injuries. So it's good that Sunderland have those options back for the moment. And hopefully as well that Dennis Cirkin isn't out for too long. The club statement seemed pretty optimistic, and it's only a wrist injury, although he has had to have an operation, I think, hasn't he, Phil? So I think, that back line for Sunderland looks reasonably healthy at the moment.
And out and wide positions, Phil, obviously two players who probably wouldn't be, well, certainly aren't some starting options there. Leam Meander and Tommy Watson. We'll come on to Meander first, just because it's not a position that we've seen him play an awful lot for Sunderland out on that right flank. I mean, were you impressed with what you saw, him deputising for Paddy Roberts at the weekend?
Yeah, I really was. For me, it was one of the big positives to take away from the game. James mentioned Alise there, which I completely agree with. Thought it was, he put in such a good performance in the context of how long he'd been out for. The fact that, he was being thrown straight back, and also the fact that he'd never played with Watson before, was able to get into some really good positions. So I think Alise was a big positive. Obviously, Connolly's goal. But other than that, Meander was the one for me, because that position, is not one where Sunderland are particularly strong, because Paveda is obviously on this kind of long road to full fitness, if you like. Roberts, I know there's been a bit of debate at times, but I think broadly speaking, Roberts has been excellent this season. But behind that, with Abdullah Bar seemingly, out of Breeze's thoughts, even though he's been on the bench at times, he's never really kicked the ball. It's a little bit of a problem position, and what we saw was, Tommy Watson going over there, but I just don't think, maybe in time he can operate on the right, but I just think it takes away so much from what he's best at. And I think when you've got such a young player coming into the side, you want him in his strongest position where he feels most comfortable, which is clearly on the left. So I think for Meander to be able to show that he's a genuine option on the right, I think is really important. And I don't think I wasn't surprised at all by his performance, because if you think about his best traits, it's very well suited to playing out on the right, particularly in a counter-attacking team. We know he presses well. We know he's quite apt to do defensive work, but he carries the ball really well and he's quick. And although, because he's such a young player and he's a forward player, there are times where he doesn't quite make the right decision, or, his touch isn't great or whatever. But generally speaking, he's quite explosive. He can go past players easily. And we know he's got a pretty powerful left foot. It's an option I genuinely really, really like. And I think with Isidore doing so well, I think with Connolly's experience, it's a big thing for Meander, because otherwise there isn't going to be loads and loads of opportunities, I think, for him to get in the team. So I think this is a good way for him to get into the side, whether it's from the bench or occasionally when he's rotated in, if Roberts needs the rest. I think it's a really good route in for him to show what he can do. And I think he's potentially going to be, quite a good option for Sunderland, who, as we said, loads this season, haven't always had options on the bench. And I think that's hurt them. And I think I like the idea that, after Roberts has kind of done his magic for 70 minutes, he potentially got some tired legs, game opening up a bit. I really like the idea of Meander coming on from the right. I think he could be really effective. I've got a hell of a lot of time for Meander, the way that he's sort of, the work he's done since he came back in the summer from a loan at Hibs, where he wasn't kicking a ball. I think he's been excellent. I honestly think that was one of the, like I say, Alise and Meander off the right were two of the big positives for me, because I think that's two real new options, if you like, for the Breeze. And I think that's going to be massive in the sort of coming weeks.
Phil mentioned him there, James. Obviously, we spoke at quite a bit of length about Abdul Bar and Adil Ashish as well, actually, last week. I mean, the fact that both sort of failed to get a look in again, what do you make of that? Do you think it perhaps signifies that the writing might be on the wall for them at Sunland?
Yeah, I think so. I think at pretty much every turn this season, wherever there's been an argument to use Abdullah Bar or Adil Aushish, it's not been taken by Regis Labrie. He clearly doesn't fancy them. You know, obviously Watson's preferred over on the left. Alexic came on ahead of Aushish, or Bar Meander was preferred on the right-hand side. So he clearly doesn't fancy them. They were there, I think, on Saturday to make the subs bench, but he didn't turn to them in a pressurised situation when, you know, Sunderland were holding on for a potential win. So I think that tells you everything you need to know. And I would expect potential loan or permanent moves in January. If not January, then I think definitely the summer. The caveat to that in January would be if they do move on, then Sunderland would probably need one or two bodies in to just replace them in terms of Sunderland's squad ahead of sort of a busy Christmas period and end to the season. But yeah, I can't see it happening for them under Labrie at the moment. You know, things can quickly change and they might have to be started at some point. Personally, I can't see it because the indications from Labrie, as I say, at every turn in pre-season and the beginning of the season, are that he doesn't fancy them. And I think the thing that did it particularly for Bar was probably the Preston Carabao Cup game. I think he started that game from memory, and he just looked very, very erratic. And it perhaps is a little bit harsh on him because he's not had that run of games that he did have last season, because he was keeping Roberts out the side at times last season, and his return in terms of goal contributions isn't bad. But I just think in terms of Labrice's game model, which is his favourite word, you don't always know what you're going to get from Abdullah Bar. He could get you a goal or an assist, but he does tend to lose the ball quite a bit. And if he's in that sort of off mood, I think it could be quite detrimental to your team. He does tend to lose it in bad positions. So I think that's probably the reason why he's not trusted. And then Aushish, not really sure. I do rate him in terms of his quality, whether he doesn't think he can execute what he wants either. Labrie, and obviously he sold him at Lorient as well. So yeah, I just can't see it happening for either player, unfortunately. And I don't say that with any pleasure because, you know, Abdullah Bar's given us some decent moments and I was looking forward to his development at Sunderland, but it doesn't work out for every player. And Adil Ashish came highly rated. I think he signed a 5-year contract. I thought he was hung out to dry by Michael Beale at Ipswich away. I think he has shown some flashes, but sometimes under a certain manager, it's just not going to happen for you.
I mean, what do you make of it, Phil? Because it's an interesting situation, isn't it? The way that both have sort of plummeted out of contention over the past few months.
Yeah, I don't really have an issue with it in terms of, I think ultimately, you know, you appoint a head coach to make difficult decisions and he's made a judgment call, I think, based on what he's seen behind the scenes as much as anything, I think, over the first couple of months of his tenure. You know, Bar was obviously a bit unlucky in the sense that he was injured for most of pre-season, so that obviously took away an opportunity to get up to full speed. And, you know, James, right, you mentioned the Preston game where he didn't play very well. I think it's tricky, isn't it, in that scenario when you haven't had a lot of football and what have you. But ultimately, you know, I think that it's Labrie is had a very good start of the season. I think most of his calls have been justified. You know, I mean, there was a bit of debate at the start of pre-season. I remember about, you know, Job or Aushish in terms of the starting 11. And I think, you know, to be fair, Labrie has been vindicated, hasn't he, on that front? There's no slight on Aushish. I just think it looks like a good decision now. The bit that I find weird is I don't really get this thing of like, oh, they're part of the plans, they're part of the plans, they're part of the plans. They're obviously not, are they? Because like if they're not going to come on in that situation where, you know, Sunderland are out on their feet, and there's clearly a need to bring players on to introduce them. You know, that's the bit that I find a little bit weird. I don't get what the point is on having them on the bench with absolutely no intention of using them. I'm not really sure who that serves. I think them playing under 21s football, I guess they're not thrilled about it, but you can understand it because there's a need for them to keep their match fitness. It's going to be in everyone's interest to find them a move in January. That's both Sunderland and the players. So to keep their match fitness ahead of January is really, really important. So I get that totally. But it's almost like this dance of like, oh, you know, the door's still open for them. You know, they can play their way in. They're on the bench. I just don't. Starting to find it a little bit bizarre, especially after Saturday, where like, well, if they're not coming on in that scenario, they're just never coming on, are they? So, Meander I thought was brilliant, but the last 10 minutes he was clearly out on his feet, because he hadn't started the game for however long. So that's the bit I find a bit odd. The decision itself, I think, ultimately I'm fine with. Your head coach has to make difficult decisions, and broadly speaking, he's been vindicated in the results that he's produced. But I find the whole thing of them being on the bench and stuff a bit odd. I'm just not sure who that's kind of serving at this point, because they're clearly not going to get on the pitch.
One man who did get on the pitch, James, Milan Alexic, obviously a long-awaited Sunland debut for him. He's been at the centre of a lot of sort of discourse after the game. Obviously, he missed that really good opportunity. Millwall then go almost immediately up the other end and find that late equaliser. I mean, what did you make of that moment? And more broadly speaking, what did you make of his first performance in a Sunland shirt?
When he came on, he had a decent couple of touches. He did misplace a few passes, but just looking at his sort of stature, his ability on the ball, his touch, I actually thought, wow, I can see why Sunderland have signed him. Like, there's technical ability there. He's 19. He looked reasonably assured. It's a big ask to come on when your team is defending the lead at the Den. Phil mentioned that atmosphere, but it's one of the toughest assignments in the Championship. He's 19, coming over from a new country. By all accounts, hasn't got a massive grasp of the language yet. That chance, it's a really, really good save by the goalkeeper, and he's really unlucky that actually it doesn't go out from a corner, and then Millwall go up the other end and score. Ideally, you'd like him to bury that chance, but there's a whole host of things that could have prevented that goal going in. I don't really place any blame at the door of Milan Alexic. When I was watching it live, I was like, heading between the television and the laptop, I was like, should he have perhaps gone for the corner? But he's actually played in clean through. So if he turns his back and goes for the corner there, that would probably have caused equal amounts of fumes. So I don't think he needs to be hung out to dry. I've seen some interesting comments about him. It's his first 20, 30 minutes of football at the Den. I don't even really, judging by Labrisse's comments, think it was planned for him to come on and do that. Obviously, it was necessitated by the injury to Aaron Connolly. I think he's going to be a good player for us, hopefully. There's a reason the club have invested heavily in him. I think reports of 3.8 million. So he might be a slow burner. It might take him a little while, but I was hugely encouraged, to be honest, from what we saw from him. I think he looks tidy.
And obviously, James mentioned the slight knock to Aaron Connolly, Phil. I mean, looking ahead now, the games are going to come thick and fast, starting with West Brom in midweek. I mean, where does Sunderland stand in terms of suspensions, injuries? Are there any players that you would expect to perhaps come back into the side? Any players who you think maybe featured at the weekend who might struggle to make that game on Tuesday night?
Yeah, I spoke to Connolly after the game, and he said it wasn't an injury. He'd had a bit of a spell of dizziness, so I think they just brought him off as a bit of a precaution, really. So he was absolutely fine by the time I spoke to him. I was pretty confident that he could play this week, but that'll obviously be something they'll have to monitor and check, but fingers crossed he'll be able to play. Obviously, Hume, Roberts and Bellingham will all be back for Tuesday night, which is massive, really, just in terms of what it adds to the bench as well as the knock-on effect, because you probably think all three of those will come into the team. And I'm trying to think. Sirkin, Yelder and Rusin are all, I think, pretty small injuries. Certainly Sirkin, I think it's just that because he had this operation, I think basically it just hadn't fully healed in time for him to play on Saturday. But I think it's literally a matter of they're taking it day by day, and he could be back at any time. There's a chance he'll play tomorrow. I think Friday is possibly more likely than tomorrow, but he's definitely not being ruled out. Yelder was there on Saturday, so it's clearly not a major injury. It's just something that kept him out of the squad. So hopefully he'll be available soon. So it will look a lot better in terms of the squad depth starting tomorrow, and hopefully that will continue to improve. But as James mentioned earlier, Meckham's now on 4 yellows. So him, Job and Rig are all on 4 yellows. And I think there's 3 games left before the cut-off. So that's going to be one to watch, because obviously all 3 of those players would be a big miss. So yeah, I think we'll see a bit of quite a few changes tomorrow. Hume, Job and Roberts, you would all think come straight back in. And obviously the positive is then that means you've got 3 players who can change the game, drop them to the bench, which is going to be really important, because Saturday I think was yet another example where you saw the opposition. We talked a bit about Sunderland dropping off in the second half. I do think part of that is not deliberate. It's a reflection of the fact that consistently we're seeing the opposition being able to make 3-4 substitutions and get fresh legs on the pitch when Sunderland are tiring. Now, Lebris does seem pretty cautious with his subs. He's not someone who's going to chuck 4 subs on after an hour. But I definitely think that's been a big factor in some of those kind of games where we've seen Sunderland drop off.
And obviously Joe Bellingham almost certainly going to come back into that starting lineup, James. I mean, Sunderland are still yet to win a game without him this season. How much of an impact will his return have on Regis Lebris' side, do you think?
Oh, massive. I think over the course of his 3-game ban, I said it on the podcast a couple of shows ago, but I genuinely think he's been Sunderland's most influential and best player so far, pound for pound this season. I think his absence is really notable. His physicality, his tackling ability, he is not adverse to doing the dirty work in midfield. He provides the platform for other players, but he's also got extreme amounts of quality on the ball. Hopefully he comes back sharp. Obviously he was away with England under-21s, wasn't he? Played a couple of games, but obviously he's had a rest from the Championship, so hopefully he comes back firing on all cylinders. I'm hoping for a similar performance. I think he was rested, wasn't he, against Plymouth last season? Didn't he come on at the Stadium of Light and score? So hopefully he's back and firing on all cylinders. The caveat to that is that he's on 4 bookings as well, so he's a yellow card away from another suspension. But until that happens, you can't really sort of worry about it. But I think him coming back into the fold is huge, and Trey Hume as well on the right hand side just adds that little bit more balance. As I say, I think 09's definitely an option there, and he didn't have a horrendous game against Millwall by any standards, but I do prefer him in the middle of defence, just given his passing ability, his range of passing. So yeah, it's good to be getting these suspended players back, and 2 massive games coming up as well against West Brom and Sheffield United, 2 good teams, and lots to play for.
Absolutely. I think that's roughly probably about all we've got time for this week. So we shall call it a day just there. Yeah, thank you for listening along. It's been a pleasure on this Monday morning. I'm trying to find my outro script and it has disappeared on me, so I'm going to have to do it off the top of the dome. Yeah, this has been the Raw Podcast. Thank you to Phil. Thank you to James. Thank you to you for listening along at home. We are broadcast on Shots TV. If you want to keep up to date with all of the latest Sunderland news, then please do so on the Echo. Phil and I can give us a follow on social media as well. We shall catch you next week. Thank you very much.